The gavel strikes once, sharp, final, echoing off marble. Every sound vanishes. Even the rustle of paper dies in the air. Judge Richard Leon leans forward, his expression caught between disbelief and awe. On the witness stand, Jasmine Crockett stands unshaken, her voice calm, yet charged with electricity. "You mistake confidence for chaos," she says softly, every syllable slicing through the arrogance that had filled the room minutes before. But truth doesn't shout, it stands. A hush swallows the courtroom. Opposing counsel lowers his gaze, searching for words that won't come. A reporter's pen slips from her fingers and hits the floor like a drumbeat. Judge Leon's eyes flicker with something unspoken. Admiration, maybe, or recognition that he's witnessing something rare. In that instant, every person in the room realizes the balance of power has shifted. Crockett doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. Her composure commands more silence than any outburst ever could. And as her words hang suspended in the charged air, a quiet murmur spreads through the gallery, the kind of sound born when disbelief meets respect. But how did a moment this explosive come to be? And what led Jasmine Crockett to speak words that left even the judge in stunned silence? Rewind. The silence that followed her words hadn't always been there. It was earned, built through weeks of spectacle that turned a courtroom into a national theater. Cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Outside, protesters clashed over signs that read, "Justice means truth, and no one above the law." Inside, every seat was filled. Politicians, journalists, and the disillusioned public leaned in to witness what they believed would be another predictable display of power. The case itself had become symbolic, a battle not just over legal interpretation, but over integrity in governance. It pitted Jasmine Crockett, the daughter of working-class grit, against a man who had built his career on fear and spectacle. His name was known, his arrogance familiar. He walked into the courtroom like he owned it, smiling for cameras that adored conflict more than clarity. Crockett didn't smile. She sat quietly, eyes scanning documents, her calm presence almost defiant against the chaos around her. The pundits misread it, calling her restraint a weakness. They were wrong. That stillness was her weapon. Judge Leon, known for his composure, found himself glancing at her more than once, curious, maybe wary. There was something in her poise that unsettled even the powerful. It wasn't defiance. It was conviction so steady it refused to perform for approval. The nation watched as narratives formed like storm clouds. Would this young, congresswoman-turned-attorney be crushed under the weight of experience and ego? Or would she, against all odds, turn a public ambush into a defining moment for truth itself? Outside, trending hashtags began to whisper her name, a low hum of anticipation spreading across social feeds. Crockett versus the machine. Truth on trial. In that moment, it no longer felt like a case. It felt like a test of dignity, of restraint, of whether calm could survive in a culture addicted to noise. And as the judge called the room to order, a current of tension pulsed through the crowd. Everyone sensed something rare was about to unfold, a confrontation that would rewrite what composure truly meant. But before Crockett ever took that stand, the story of arrogance and its long history had already begun. He was the kind of man who mistook applause for truth. Years in politics had carved confidence into his face. The smooth smile, the deliberate pause, the eyes that gleamed whenever cameras turned his way. His name was everywhere. Op-eds, cable panels, book covers with gold lettering that promised leadership and delivered vanity. To his followers, he was a symbol of strength. To those who looked closer, he was a mirror reflecting the system's self-importance. In the courtroom that day, he sat with shoulders relaxed and chin high, as if justice itself were an old friend. He didn't see Jasmine Crockett as an equal. To him, she was a headline, another idealist destined to crumble under the weight of experience. His smirk wasn't cruelty. It was habit, the same one he'd worn during Senate hearings when he'd interrupted witnesses mid-sentence. the same one he'd flashed to cameras after dismissing a journalist's question as uninformed emotion. Flashback, cable news footage. He's on a panel, laughing. "These young politicians," he says, voice smooth with disdain, "they mistake passion for competence. The law requires discipline, not hashtags." Laughter fills the studio. A host nods, eager to stay in orbit around his authority. He leans back, satisfied, knowing the clip will trend. Not because of insight, but dominance. It wasn't that he was evil. He was efficient, a product of institutions that rewarded arrogance dressed as intellect. His rise was built not on brilliance, but on comfort with power. He'd learned that the loudest man in the room could be mistaken for the smartest. And when power never says no, even decency begins to sound optional. Judge Richard Leon remembered watching him years earlier during a congressional inquiry. Leon had admired his composure then, the command of words, the patience with which he dismantled opponents. But now, seated at the bench, Leon noticed something he hadn't before, the performance behind the polish. Every gesture seemed designed for optics. Every objection felt like theater. The courtroom audience, too, picked up on it, subtle at first. A glance between reporters, an exchanged smirk among his aides. They thought victory was inevitable, that Crockett's calm was a prelude to collapse. In the gallery, whispers carried like static. "She looks nervous. She's outmatched." But if arrogance is gravity, hubris is the fall waiting. Beneath it, because beneath his polished rhetoric were cracks, ones visible only when he was challenged by someone who refused to play his game. A journalist once cornered him off camera about a policy reversal he'd denied in public. He leaned in and said, "People don't remember facts. They remember who looked stronger saying them." That philosophy had carried him through years of scrutiny. Until now. Now, in a courtroom stripped of applause, his performance met silence, the one sound he'd never mastered. Each time he smirked, Crockett didn't respond. Each time he dismissed, she only took notes. And that quiet dignity unnerved him more than any raised voice could have. Leon watched closely, his neutrality still intact, but thinning at the edges. The judge had seen hundreds of cases, but something about this one felt different. The tension wasn't just legal, it was moral. It was the old world of power facing the new language of truth. Outside, supporters of the opposing counsel gathered near the courthouse steps, laughing for cameras, predicting an easy win. "She won't last 10 minutes, one said. He'll bury her with precedent." But arrogance always underestimates what calm can do when cornered. And as the day drew closer to the pivotal exchange that would silence those laughs, the man at the center of it all still believed he was untouchable, unaware that the ground beneath him had already begun to shift. But Jasmine Crockett's story wasn't written in arrogance. It was forged in resistance. Before the lights, before the cameras, there was a small office with flickering bulbs and stacks of legal pads. Jasmine Crockett would sit there long after midnight, the hum of the city fading outside her window. The desk was secondhand, the chair uneven, but the space was sacred, where she learned to turn frustration into focus. Every case file told a story of someone unseen, unheard, unseen again. She underlined each name like a promise. She hadn't come from legacy. She came from grit. The daughter of workers who believed in service over spotlight, she carried their values into a profession that often measured worth by pedigree. Her mentors told her, "You'll need twice the preparation to get half the credit." And she believed them, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Flashback, her first courtroom battle. She was fresh out of law school, facing an opponent who spoke over her at every turn. The judge barely looked up. The jury seemed unconvinced before she'd spoken a word. But when her turn came, she didn't raise her voice. She raised her clarity. She walked through the evidence like she was rebuilding the truth itself, brick by brick. By the time she finished, the silence in the room wasn't dismissal. It was respect. From that day on, she carried a quiet philosophy. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand. Years later, when she entered Congress, the rooms only grew louder. Men interrupted, pundits scoffed, commentators reduced her brilliance to sound bites. Yet, every time they shouted, she grew quieter and sharper. Her calm became strategy. Her restraint became weapon. She built her platform not from outrage, but from observation. While others grandstand for viral clips, she listened. And when she finally spoke, her words landed like verdicts. It was never performance. It was principle. In moments of self-doubt, she'd return to that old office in her mind. The scratched desk, the late-night hum. The reminder that her voice had power even when the world tried to talk over it. She knew what it meant to exist in spaces designed to overlook people like her. And she'd turned that invisibility into armor. A quiet voice lingers like narration. She learned early that in rooms built to silence people like her, silence could become her power. That belief became her compass. It guided her through the noise of Washington, through hearings where arrogance masqueraded as expertise, through moments when even allies advised her to tone it down. But Jasmine Crockett didn't tone down. She tuned in. To justice. To truth. To the people whose stories got buried under power's loud machinery. And when the call came, the one that brought her back to the courtroom, this time not as an unknown, but as a voice for accountability, she didn't hesitate. She saw it for what it was. Not just a case, but a reckoning. A chance to remind the nation that law, without conscience, is just control. The night before the trial, she sat by a window, the city lights stretching endlessly, her notes spread before her like a map. Her pen hovered above the page. Instead of legal citations, she wrote one line, "Dignity is my defense." Then she closed her notebook and exhaled. So when the moment came, and arrogance filled the room, Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned into truth. The air thickened as the opposing counsel rose, papers in hand, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. He spoke with the rhythm of someone too used to being obeyed, each word dripping with condescension disguised as intellect. "Your Honor," he began, pacing slowly, "what we have here is not a matter of law, but of misplaced passion. Counsel may be articulate, but passion does not rewrite precedent." Laughter rippled from his aides behind him. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready. Judge Leon adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing, waiting to see how Crockett would respond. She didn't move. Her hands rested calmly on the table, her notes untouched. The opposing counsel tried again, his tone growing bolder. "Some of us have spent decades studying the law, not performing it," he said, glancing her way. "We should remember that courtrooms are for arguments, not aspirations." A few chuckles broke out from the gallery. Crockett lifted her gaze, meeting his with quiet steadiness. Her silence unsettled him more than any objection could have. He cleared his throat, pivoting to another point, a rhetorical trap designed to corner her. He cited precedent after precedent, stringing them together like armor, confident that volume and verbosity would drown clarity. Crockett listened, truly listened. Each line of his monologue another stone he was unknowingly piling atop his own ego. The room began to shift. Reporters whispered. One pen tapped nervously against a legal pad. The rhythm of arrogance was starting to sound desperate. Judge Leon's eyes flicked from one side to the other. He'd seen countless debates, but something about this felt different, like a storm quietly gathering behind calm skies. The opposing counsel ended his speech with a flourish, chin high. "And that, Your Honor, concludes my statement. I trust the court will see through the performance before us." Crockett stood slowly, not a rustle in the gallery. Her movement alone silenced the air. She didn't glance at her notes. She didn't clear her throat. She simply exhaled, a steady, measured breath that somehow carried more power than his entire display. The judge leaned forward. The camera zoomed in. Somewhere in the stillness, the shift began. But no one expected what came next. A defense so sharp it would turn a courtroom into a moment of history. Jasmine Crockett stood, the weight of the moment settling around her like armor. The courtroom was utterly still. No shuffling papers, no whispers. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade as she lifted her chin, meeting the judge's gaze first, not to seek permission, but to acknowledge the gravity of what came next. "Your Honor," she began, her tone calm and exact. "Opposing counsel has given us a performance. Eloquent, rehearsed, and, unfortunately, irrelevant." A few eyebrows lifted. Her voice didn't rise, it carved. Each word sounded deliberate, sculpted for precision. "We are not here to debate personalities or pedigrees. We are here to measure truth." Pause. Judge Leon's eyes narrowed slightly. A murmur rippled through the back of the gallery. Crockett turned to the opposing counsel. "You've cited cases," she continued, "but each one collapses under the same flaw: arrogance pretending to be logic." She lifted one of his documents, flipping through it without looking down. "You reference precedent from a system built to protect the powerful, and yet you call it justice. You say passion clouds judgment. I say indifference blinds it." Her words landed like gavel strikes. Across the aisle, the opposing counsel shifted in his chair, the smirk fading. For the first time, he wasn't performing. He was reacting. Crockett pressed on, voice unflinching. "You've built an argument around reputation, not reason. You've mistaken familiarity with authority. You speak of discipline, yet your entire defense is ego masquerading as expertise." The courtroom began to tilt, not physically, but morally. The energy changed. The audience could feel the axis shift as confidence drained from one side of the room and gathered quietly around her. Crockett paused again, letting the silence breathe. "You see," she said, lowering her tone, "when the law serves the loudest voice, justice becomes theater, and we are all forced to buy tickets." A low gasp spread across the benches. Judge Leon blinked, his pen frozen midair. Crockett stepped closer to the center, the echo of her heels like drumbeats. "You called me emotional," she said softly. "You call my approach naive. But what you fear isn't emotion, it's empathy. You mistake care for weakness because you've never had to earn your credibility in a room that doubted your right to speak." The opposing counsel opened his mouth, then closed it. His jaw tightened. She had stripped his argument of its polish, leaving only the raw vanity beneath. And then came the line, quiet, almost tender, but it detonated in the silence. "Your arrogance isn't law," she said. "It's just loud." Time froze. A reporter's pen slipped again. The same sound as before, sharp against the marble floor. Judge Leon's breath left him in a slow, audible exhale. The opposing counsel stared down at his notes, his eyes unfocused, as if realizing for the first time that he was outmatched not by volume, but by vision. Crockett didn't look at him. She turned back to the judge. "The law," she continued, "isn't meant to protect comfort. It's meant to protect conscience. And if we forget that, if we confuse dominance for justice, then we've already lost more than any verdict could restore." Her words lingered in the air like the echo of a hymn. The audience, once restless, now sat transfixed, some blinking back tears, others recording on trembling phones. Even the court reporter, who'd typed through decades of proceedings, slowed her fingers as if afraid to break the spell. Crockett closed her folder, calm again. No flourish, no victory smile, just quiet certainty. Judge Leon leaned back, his expression unreadable, but his voice, when it finally came, was softer than before. "Ms. Crockett," he said slowly, "the court thanks you for your clarity." And with that, the spell broke. Reporters rushed for the doors, whispers erupted, and the hum of the world returned, but altered. What had just happened didn't feel like a debate. It felt like revelation. But as the echoes of her words faded, their impact began to spread far beyond that courtroom. The morning after, the clip had already become legend. 24 hours earlier, it was a courtroom exchange. Now, it was a cultural event. Hashtag Crockett Effect. Hashtag Composure is Power. Hashtag Truth Doesn't Tremble. Millions watched the same moment, that line, that pause, that stillness, over and over again. On TikTok, reaction videos piled up. Young women mouthing her words, law students dissecting her phrasing, elders smiling softly and saying, "That's how you do it." The sound of her voice, calm, unwavering, became an anthem for those tired of shouting matches and smug condescension disguised as debate. On X, the political spectrum lit up. Pundits argued, commentators spun, and yet even her critics admitted it. She had exposed something larger than a courtroom imbalance. She had punctured the illusion that arrogance equals authority. One commentator wrote, "In 10 words, she did what panels and protests couldn't. She made Composure viral." Major networks ran the clip on loop. The cheer in red. Crockett freezes courtroom and sparks a movement. Nighttime anchors dissected every word, noting the precision in her cadence, the steadiness in her stare. A montage played across screens. Her quote paired with protest signs, murals, classroom discussions. It wasn't just admiration, it was adoption. In the streets, people began to echo her phrasing. A teacher wrote it on a whiteboard. A protester painted it across cardboard. One student, interviewed on live TV, said she didn't shout to be heard. She stood to be seen. That's power. Meanwhile, inside chambers, Judge Richard Leon sat alone, watching the replay from a tablet. The clip paused mid-sentence, her eyes frozen in focus. He leaned back, removed his glasses, and muttered under his breath, "One of the finest demonstrations of legal clarity I've witnessed." Then he smiled, not with amusement, but with recognition. Her opponents, once smug, now scrambled to explain. Press releases stumbled over themselves, trying to dilute what couldn't be denied. The more they spoke, the smaller they sounded. The arrogance she had exposed didn't just falter, it fractured. And through it all, Jasmine remained silent. No interviews, no victory tour, just a brief statement released through her office. The truth never needs to shout. It just needs to stand. The internet took that line and made it prophecy. People quoted it under viral clips of calm defiance, of quiet strength. It became a shorthand for dignity, a signal that composure was not retreat but rebellion. In a world obsessed with volume, she had made stillness trend. And as the feeds kept scrolling and the headlines kept flashing, something deeper began to take root, a reflection not just on her brilliance, but on what her moment revealed about all of us. Because beyond the viral fame, this moment held a deeper message about who we are and what kind of strength the future demands. Outside the courthouse, the air hummed with energy. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, supporters lining the steps. Jasmine Crockett paused at the top of the marble stairs, the same poise she'd carried inside still wrapped around her like quiet armor. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. A reporter leaned forward, microphone trembling slightly. "Congresswoman, how do you respond to those calling this a personal triumph?" Crockett's gaze softened. "It wasn't personal," she said. "It was necessary." Another voice cut in. "Do you feel vindicated?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both grace and exhaustion. "Vindication," she said, "belongs to the truth, not to me. Dignity," she continued, her tone steady, "is louder than disrespect, and truth doesn't tremble." The crowd quieted, the quote landing like a final verdict. Phones lifted, cameras zoomed in, but she had already turned slightly toward the sky, as if searching for something beyond the spectacle. The narrator's voice entered softly, almost like thought. This wasn't just a courtroom victory. It was a cultural reckoning, a reminder that power built on arrogance will always collapse under the weight of composure. What Jasmine Crockett did that day wasn't about winning an argument. It was about rewriting the rhythm of resistance. As she walked down the courthouse steps, the orchestral music rose, strings swelling gently beneath the sound of footsteps on marble. Each step felt symbolic, a march from confrontation toward transformation. The sunlight caught the edge of her jacket, turning the moment into something almost sacred, as if the building itself bowed in acknowledgement. In living rooms across the nation, people watched in silence. Parents pointed to the screen. Teachers paused lessons to replay her words. Somewhere, a young girl sat at a small wooden desk, whispering to herself, "Truth doesn't tremble." The narrator continued, voice woven with quiet hope. Maybe that's what this was all about. Not just law or politics, but permission for a generation to see that intellect can stand taller than intimidation, that composure can roar louder than chaos. In a world that often mistakes noise for strength, Jasmine had proven that the calmest voice can still move mountains. The final image lingered, Crockett stepping into a flood of light, her figure framed against the courthouse columns. The crowd behind her buzzed with questions, but she didn't turn back. She just kept walking forward, unhurried, unshaken. The narrator whispered the truth the nation had just begun to learn. Sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's sovereignty. And as millions replayed that moment, one question lingered. What happens when calm becomes the loudest rebellion? If you believe dignity is louder than arrogance, share this moment. Subscribe and stand with the movement proving that calm isn't weakness, it's strength. Because in a world full of shouting, composure is the last rebellion. When arrogance tried to define the moment, Jasmine Crockett redefined it with grace. Her voice didn't echo, it resonated. Her silence wasn't retreat, it was command. So let this not be just a viral clip, but a reminder. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands, unshaken, undeniable, and unforgettable. Composure is power. Truth doesn't tremble.